Alright, everybody, hi. Welcome to my unscripted, ad-libbed, but organized breakdown of the code and design for my Game Jam my Brackeys 2021 Game Jam submission, Ape Together Strong. I'm gonna do this because I have nothing better to do, honestly, and I feel like it would be very insightful for any beginners using Game Maker Studio 2 or anybody who's interested in the process that goes into making something in Game Maker Studio, something complete. So even though this is a very small game, there is a lot of code and design that goes into it, and I made sure that if I ever wanted to, I could easily build upon this entire game just using the systems in place. Let me fix my microphone real quick and fix some of the volume. You might hear some like occasional like beeping or clicking. I'm still trying to figure that out with my interface and the connections I'm using. It's probably just a cable or something. But so we're gonna look at this notepad. We're gonna be reviewing things in this order. I'm gonna start with the concept, design, and theme of whatever this game jam was. I'm going to move on to systems and management, so the player's stats, which would probably come later in player programming, but it's going to come in here. So I'm going to talk about the systems that I have in place and the different managers that I use, because in Game Maker, while it's not like other frameworks or engines where everything is object based, and they have to have like a actual object in each room for what you're coding. It's not just like some script you can refer back to or use. You have to have that instance of an object in your room. It's not something I'm a fan of in Game Maker, but at least that's how I know it works for now. There's definitely other ways around it. You can make your own ways to build systems. This is just how I built my systems. Then we're going to move on to level loading and data structures. This is going to be way shorter. It's just going to be because this game is made primarily for HTML5 for browser use, and Game Maker does not really like JavaScript or HTML that much, or HTML doesn't like Game Maker for that. So there's a lot of workarounds I had to do for level loading, and that involves the usage of data structures, and that's not really something I know a lot of beginners go into, so I think it might be a good practical use of it, or a good example of practical use of data structures. Next, after that, we'll be going on to the players programming and their stats, and also the camera, because it just makes sense to include that there. And I feel like my camera, the camera is not really complex, but you know, it's something that exists. Then we'll move on to AI programming for the enemies and the boss. Then we move on to level design and art. I'll say this right now, all the art was done by my friend Jaylene, and she's very talented, and I could not have done any of this without her. The only thing she didn't do were some of the background elements. These were taken by free packs online, just free background resource packs online on itch and stuff. I made the mistake of not saving the names, but if by the time I upload this I remember what they are, or I find out like what they are, I will include them in the description. So she did all the character, all the enemy art, all the icons. The only things she didn't do are some of these background elements. After that, we go on to other stuff that was included in the game, such as the sandbox mode, some of the test rooms that I made, and the death screen and win screen, and in the main menu. And then after that, we'll do some reflection. We'll talk about what I could have done better with this game, what I learned from this game jam, and what I'm going to be doing moving forward, because this was my first complete game. So we're going to begin with concept, design, and theme. And for that, we're going to move over to Google Chrome, go to my doc, and we're going to go through this. A lot of this that was written down doesn't line up with the final game. And obviously it's going to happen because it's a game jam. I had 1 week to make this, and I overscoped a lot. So we're going to read through this, and I'm going to point out what made it in, what got changed, and what got cut. So here's the initial concept that I wrote down. You play as a monkey. The game was supposed to be procedurally generated, but it wasn't. You team up with other monkeys by charming them. I'm not sure what I meant by charming. I feel like it was going to be something along the lines of Spore, but we didn't end up doing that either. And having them join your party, that's true. You gain new abilities and better stats, kind of true. You take on bosses and other enemy camps. This was another idea I wanted to take from Spore, but it didn't end up happening. But you do fight a boss, and you fight a ton of enemies, and I guess you can consider that camps. This one, I don't even know why I made a section for it. Controls and features. You move and you throw a banana. Pretty much it. The player monkey, he's basic. He can throw bananas. He's the leader, and he has a crown. Again, I don't know why I wrote all this down, but what you need to know for the player is that you play as him. You can move around on a top-down 2D perspective. You can shoot a banana, which is your weapon, and you can go around collecting other monkeys to join you and follow you. Now, the ally monkeys are probably the most important thing about this game. They're the main gimmick, they're the main thing you design around, and they're the main mechanic. The idea was to have a new monkey per level. That didn't really work out because of the way I designed the monkeys, but they add to your stats, they reduce cooldowns for certain abilities, and overall they just make your life easier. If there was an audio change just now, I turned down the gain on my mic just a slight bit to hopefully help out with some clipping or whatever. So here's the initial concept for monkeys. You're originally going to be able to get new abilities for different types of monkeys, and the cooldowns would change and the stats would get better. That was another scope creep on my end. One day, if I ever do come back to a game like this, I would love to add all these special monkeys. You know, the original idea was that you can throw banana peels to slow down enemies, throw simple monkeys to distract them. You were supposed to be able to remote control them. You know, throw poop to it does AoE damage or some shit. And the white monkey screams really loud, pushes the enemy back. This didn't end up making it into the final game, and I feel like it was a little bit better for that. I think the simplicity really worked well with the way I designed the enemies and the levels. The important ones are the stat monkeys. There's the brown monkey, boosts all your stats evenly. It still holds true. Yellow monkey boosts your strength and doesn't make your banana bigger, but he does boost strength and also some other stats in the end. And the blue monkey makes you faster, increases your rate of fire. It doesn't increase player speed. It only increases rate of fire and a few other things like range and power. Here, let's go back down to health. I'll talk about the final player stats in a second. The original idea for health was going to be either a one-hit kill thing, and if you lost all your monkeys and you got hit, you'd be dead, or it was by just straight up player health. I ended up going with player health because that seemed a little more reasonable. And it was supposed to be fractional, but I didn't end up implementing that because it was just easier to, it was a lot clearer to make it just peeled and unpeeled. I originally wanted 2 levels for the game. The first one's a jungle where you fight bugs, and that was the only level for the game that was made. And the original boss was supposed to be a tiger, and it was supposed to be an elephant and a snake and a chameleon, but I ended up going with bugs for all the enemies. I felt like that fit the theme better, and I don't know, something, monkeys eat bugs, I don't know. And then you're supposed to be able to go into a city. This would have been a little more eye-catching for the game jam, which I probably should have done in the first place, but it didn't really make sense to me. And I'm kind of happy with the fact that we went with the jungle setting because I thought it was a lot of fun to make. And you can see some of the ideas here. In the end, we ended up going with this. So I'll start playing the game for you right now, and I'll talk about some of the design about it. We'll do a quick run through of the entire game. I'm not sure if you can hear any of the music right now, but all the music was done by my girlfriend Elena, and it was great music, and I feel like it added a lot to the game. So this is the starting room, and this is your player monkey. He follows the mouse. You can move around, and when you touch a monkey, you collect him. Now these black monkeys were a new addition that I didn't include in the doc, and these made it into the final game. They throw bananas of their own. They're smaller, and they go a little shorter than yours, but they are just as strong. These blue ones increase your rate of fire and your range. And as you can see, I picked up the big banana, so now I can shoot bananas my own. They're bigger. and they also cause some screen shake. I go pick up this crown. That's just for aesthetics and for starting the game. These yellow ones increase your range as well as your power. So I can see the range is pretty good right now, but the rooms get bigger, so range is important. So I can go around and pick up monkeys. I specifically made it so that by the time that if you were diligent enough to go explore around the first room, you would get about 24 monkeys by the time you went to the first room, or like to the first enemy room. So let's head over there right now. The first enemies that you encounter are these flower guys, which were actually the last enemy to be made, and they just aim at you, and they're basically stationary turrets. I made them have really low health so that they're easier for new players to fight, and so that they don't frustrate or kill anyone too early. In this next room I have a lot more of them, so that by the time you get here, you know how to fight them. And I also introduced this bee enemy. He flies around and he doesn't collide with anything. It was just easier to program, and it also made more sense. So it's pretty easy in these first few rooms so that you can get used to it. If you get a lot of black monkeys, oh yeah, you get monkeys randomly. It's all by chance. So these black monkeys will do most of the work for you, but you shoot the fastest and you also do the most damage, so it's a good idea for you to fight the stronger enemies. This room is basically the hub. Up here you can see that there's a keyhole to the cave, and there's a key counter down here, so I assume I have to go get some keys. So if I go over here, there's another room, and this is your first hard room, I'd say. This is where I introduced the ant enemies, where they're basically moving turrets, and then there's a lot of bee enemies as well as a couple flowers. So this really keeps the player on their toes, and it also encourages them to shoot on their own. You get the first key, and there's no enemies left here. There would be a music change just now if you could hear it. I'm pretty sure you might be able to hear it on your side. For some reason I can't, but that's okay. Actually, I know you can hear it on your side because I'm using different headphones. So if I go up here, I still can't use the door. So it says keys plural, so I'm assuming I have to go explore a little more. Oh look, there's another room. This is probably the hardest room in the game other than the boss room, because there's a lot of enemies here. So let's just fight off some of these guys. I'm pretty sure it's just bees and ants for this room. And this is also where you get the most monkeys. If you're good enough at the game, you can get around 80 something monkeys by the end of it. I only made it out with 73, but that's okay. You can't exit a room until you beat all of the enemies, so that's how you know. So we're gonna come back in here. The health stays. This is the only thing that doesn't despawn in the game. And now you can go up into the cave because the key is gone. And this is where you fight the boss. He has a few different moves. He has the turret move. He has a charging move. And he also has a move where he can spawn in more bugs. He shoots a lot of bullets, and he moves pretty fast for his charge, and he has a really big hitbox. He also spawns a good amount of enemies. And as you can see, I beat him there. And thanks for playing. You made it out with 71 monkeys. Try for more. You've also unlocked Sandbox mode. Press M to spawn in more monkeys. So if I'm in this room now, I can keep pressing M, and I keep getting more and more monkeys. And that is Ape Together Strong. So I just walked you through basically the design, philosophy, I guess, of this game was to gradually introduce stuff until it gets harder and harder. Now, the game only looks easy because I've been playing it. I played it for a week straight, and I know all the ins and outs. I know all the locations of the enemies and whatnot, and I also got some pretty good luck. If you get some pretty bad luck with your monkeys, some of these rooms can get way harder, and I feel like that does attribute some replayability as well as the sandbox mode, but I could have done a little bit better to balance it out. I wanted to make sure it was easy enough for everyone to play, though, since it was a game jam and I can't predict the player skill level. If this was going to be a retail game, I would have made it a bit harder, or at least the difficulty curve would be a little more satisfying because there'd be a lot more levels. So that is the design and theme. Oh, the theme. I forgot to mention, the theme for this game jam was Stronger Together, and you can basically denote what I got from that here. Next, we're going on to systems and management. And for that, we are going to open up Room Essentials and look at some of these guys. So here's the player manager, sound manager, O game, O depth sorter, O depth object, and I think, oh, and monkey manager. And I think, I guess O enemy can count. And yeah, that should be it. So don't ever name your objects like I did, because I didn't know what each object was going to be in the end. So they all have random names, and it would have been a lot better if I had named them more according to like their purpose, or like made their naming more systematic. Okay, so let's start off with the player manager. So actually the player stats are broken up between O game and player manager. So let's bring those guys together and take a look-see at what each does. So here's the player manager. Here is a lot of game essential global variables. I find it easier to use global variables, even though they take up more memory technically. It's easier to refer to them in GameMaker without having to go with like player manager dot damage or player manager dot rate of fire, because if I could just put down rate of fire, it would be easier for me. You wouldn't use macros for that because that's not how macros work. And I feel like it was easier memory-wise and also just style-wise to use global variables. If this were any kind of framework or any other engine that used a proper coding language, I could just hash include or using whatever for player manager instead of having to do something like this. So let's go through some of this stuff. There's player speed, there's damage, rate of fire, monkey count, range, monkey types, global next room, which is used for level loading, send X, send Y, which is also for level loading, do transition, transition finish, which is also level loading, debug for myself, key is for keys, sandbox for sandbox mode, and you can assume what each one's going to get set to. Draw GUI step, the draw GUI step and the step function, well, the step doesn't actually do anything, but draw GUI is just for fade to black transitions. Let's go back to the workspace. There it is. Let's look at O game. Okay, in the create event, we have some stuff for making sure the game's resolution is good. So display is set GUI size 1920 by 1080. And then the send X and send Y are just default. And then global.deadlist is a data structure. Would I include this in here? I can include it here now, I guess. Which is the data structure that keeps track of all the items that were destroyed in a room. And I will put that in action soon enough. The step event is just for the full screen for Windows. If you use this in the browser, it's going to break the game, but I didn't really feel like checking if it was in a browser or not. So for now, this option is universal, but this is only for the Windows version. This is just to focus the window. Now, focus window is a function that I had to make. So let's go into player. As you can see, it's empty. This is a quirk with GameMaker Studio and exporting to HTML. When you export to HTML and you try to embed it into HIO, it's not going to work properly. It's not going to focus the window because there's no function telling it to focus the window. I don't know if this is an issue for every version of GameMaker, but this is an issue in 3.4. And so I had to do a workaround, which is I would create this empty function focus window, and I would call it if the player clicks inside the window. So if mouse button pressed any, focus window. And I'll show you what I had to do to work around that right here. Let's find a build of it somewhere on here. This should work. Okay. So this is something you'd find inside your GameMaker zip whenever you export the build. I would open this with code or VS Code, and you're gonna get all of the JavaScript code that GameMaker makes for you in its compiler, right? It's a lot of stuff, and it's gonna be hard to track down where your empty function is to put in the JavaScript code used to do that. So the reason that I made an empty function is so that I can easily search for it in here. So any empty function will have this surrounding it, because there's nothing in here for JavaScript to use because it's an empty function. So I can actually show you where it is. Oh, there it is right here. So this is where the empty function would be, and I use this to help me as well. I would just look this up, use this to fix window focus, and I would look for the empty function. And I would put in window.focus in here, and then I saved it, and I rezipped it, and I sent it to itch. So that is your workaround for getting stuff to focus properly in HTML5. I hope that GameMaker or Yo-Yo Games or whatever will address that in the future, but for now, that's a workaround how to do. The game start is to clear the dead list, and the room start is to send the player to the X and Y coordinates I specified. Now, I didn't need to do this, looking back on it, but this is just an extra precaution for me, honestly. And this was a symptom of the way that HTML5 handles room loading. So I'll get into that once I'm done with this section. And forgive me, my microphone's doing the thing. I honestly don't know why it's doing this. It shouldn't be doing this right now. My phone's not around. Okay. Next is the sound manager. This is pretty self-explanatory. So global variables, just so I can play sounds from different objects. Throw sounds, boop, current music. And I just assign these global variables to sound files. There's no step, and there's a room start where it'll play the music that I specify in each room. So let's go to any room. Let's go to the start room. And let's look at the room's creation code. If I can find it. It's in properties, isn't it? Yes. Creation code. And then new music equals this track. So the way it works is that if the current music does not equal the new music that is specified in the room creation code, stop playing current music, play the new music, and then current music is the new music. Pretty simple. Depth sorter and depth object are how I handled depth in the top-down perspective. So every object that I wanted to have depth was included in as a child of this object. I got this method straight from the YouTube channel The Friendly Cosmonaut, and it was very helpful, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. But essentially what it does is it takes, so in here, it will take every object that's a child of depth object and put it into a data structure grid. So it'll have, I forget, it'll have its Y coordinate in here, as well as the instance ID. So it stores the ID first and then the Y coordinate, and then it does that for every single object. And then it'll sort the grid by the Y coordinate. And then for each instance in order, it will draw it. And the way that drawing works in GameMaker is that whatever is drawn first and then drawn after, whatever's drawn after is drawn on top, so that you can get the illusion of depth by having stuff stack over each other in a proper way. And the cleanup for when this object is destroyed, and load it into a new room. Depth grid is destroyed so that I can save memory. And then depth object is just what I use as a child for everything. Monkey manager is pretty simple as well. This is what spawns in the monkeys that the player has recruited in each room. Now this is the only persistent object in the entire game. It didn't have to be, but this was just, again, I'll get into why persistency is so strange in this game after this section with the level loading. So essentially it's checking if the player object exists in this room, and then it will do a repeat loop for each type and create an instance of a monkey ally on top of the player. And it'll be recruited, and it'll have its type, and then this is just for me. And does this for each type. The reason I recruit it on the get-go is so that it doesn't recruit it, the player doesn't recruit it again and add to the monkey count when it shouldn't be. That's how you multiply monkeys, and I didn't know that I had to do that, and that would happen a lot. Next is for the enemies. This is more just like a parent object for all the enemies so that it's easier to manage them all. But if they collide with bullet, they lose some health, explosion, draw event, and then if the player exists, it'll do this step event. And then these are all the enemies that are a child of the enemy object. So I'm going to take a quick cut right now because I have to go get some water. But next we're going to talk about level loading and data structures, and we're going to talk about some issues I had with HTML5 and persistent rooms in GameMaker. Okay, so next we're going to talk about level loading and data structures. The data structures part is mostly just for that dead list thing I was talking about. Excuse me. So let's go back to the game object. I believe it was in the game object. Object. Here it is. Yes. Okay. So let's actually look at an enemy real quick. An enemy's code. It should be, no, these are the functions. Excuse me. Let's take a look at the bug, for example. At the room start function for the bug. Here it is. So, at the beginning of every room, each object that has this function that should be destroyed whenever I load a room again will run this check. So, temporary variable me equals data structure find list index global.deadList ID. Basically, that means that this object is going to check for its instance ID in this global dead list. And if it's in here, then I will destroy myself. As in, like, I will delete and I will exit all code. If not, it's not going to do anything. It's going to exist. And let me see if I can find it. Here we go. So if I die, I will add myself to the dead list, and I will do all the things I need to do when I'm dead. And this also goes for the ally spawn object. Here it is. When I collide with the player, I'll add myself to the dead list. On the room start, I will check if I'm dead. Now, the reason there is a different object from the ally spawn and the ally is because the ally has different properties from the ally spawn. If allies were activated by getting collided with, that would kind of ruin everything. And that would mess up how everything's loaded and how keeping the player ally count consistent works. Now, with level loading, let's go into the menu, I think? Or was it R and it? Okay, it's either one of those. So I will tell you a quick anecdote about level loading in HTML5. So originally I didn't have that data structure dead list to check if objects were dead, I had persistent rooms, and the player object was also persistent, and the only thing that wasn't was some of the objects, right? And I was relying on Game Maker's persistency to get around level loading, and that isn't really good. And overall, you shouldn't be using persistency like that. If you have stuff like managers or overall game objects, you can make those persistent if they don't require any like erasing or anything, um, because those are important. But that is a huge memory leak that I was trying to do with that type of level loading. Um, so here instead, so like what I was, and it was working fine in the Windows version of the game. When I was testing this out, I was only building for Windows. But when I tried to port it over to HTML5, whenever I would load into a room and try to come back out, the entire game would freeze. Let's see if I can find an example of that in here. No, that's working fine. Let's see. This is the Windows build. Oh, hold on. Yeah, so this was another issue that came with the level loading issue. So if I went out of a room and came back in and died, this is what would happen. And I'm not sure what was going on. And that was in the Windows build. If I can find one from the HTML one, that would serve the visual better. So this was my first test of level loading. This is using persistent rooms. So you'd be able to pop in and out of one room to the other. And here's another issue. The amount of monkeys you had wasn't consistent. So let's keep watching. So right now I have 8 monkeys. And I come back in here. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's a lot more monkeys than 8. And what was going on was I was using persistent objects for everything. And I can't tell you the exact logic because I don't have any of that old code. But something along the lines of too many instances of this object, or the checks weren't working right, or the way the levels loaded the persistent rooms was messing up how the monkeys responded. So that's why I had to make the monkey manager object and keep that data structure, and also change how monkeys were recruited. The way it works is that if the player collides with the ally before it's recruited, it becomes recruited and activates and moves. That wouldn't work in what I'm doing, because since these levels are persistent, those monkeys that I'm leaving behind when I go to the next room are still there. And when I come back in, the game keeps those monkeys that were there and then also spawns in clones of those monkeys on top of it. It's like imposter syndrome with those monkeys. So that was an issue. So I had to change how I loaded levels and loaded monkeys and loaded everything else from there. Another issue that I don't think I can find a visual for you right now would come when I use the HTML5 testing build whatever in Chrome, and I would try to load back a level that I left, and it wouldn't work. HTML5 does not like persistent rooms or persistent objects. It breaks everything. So my word of advice to you is to learn how to load levels in rooms and everything you need properly with the use of data structures, like I did with the dead list and with the monkey manager and whatnot, and without using any persistency in your game at all. That should be your last resort for anything, especially in stuff that requires, like, I don't know, just especially in HTML5, honestly, just because it's hard enough to build for to begin with, and that's just another thing added on that made it really hard to work with. That really set me back as well. That set me back a couple days of progress because I couldn't figure it out. So just one last time, I will give you a run through of how stuff is loaded in this game. So I set up all of the stuff in RNet. In this room, if you hit space, it moves you to RNet. You go to RNet, and let's find what the objects are. There's the camera, there's the depth object, depth sorter. Oh no, it's actually in start. In the start room, game is created. Camera, depth object, depth sorter, player manager is created, and monkey manager is created somewhere. I don't think it's in. No, this is the test room. I don't think monkey manager is made in there. No, monkey manager is actually made in the menu, I think. Which honestly isn't the. No, it's the sound manager. I can't find out where monkey manager is made if I'm being honest, but that's another thing that you should probably keep track of that I didn't do well, is to make sure you're keeping track of all your important objects and managers and stuff. It's somewhere around here. Just take my word for it. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's made in this room. And then you leave and you never come back. So. And those objects reappear, except for a couple of them which are persistent for some reason. Some of them worked with persistency and some of them didn't. That's all I can tell you, I guess. Next, we move on to player programming, stats, and camera. I'll get the camera out of the way right now. It's really simple. This is literally all it is. If the instance exists, which is whatever object it's supposed to follow, this is supposed to be that like it can follow anything. And I was originally gonna have cutscenes so I could use this a little easier instead of just following the player. So decoupling your code is a great idea. Not all the code in this game is decoupled, which is a mistake on my part for scope. But for something like this camera, which is super simple, I figured out how to do it easily. Decoupling means that this code can apply to anything. So if I want to follow an enemy or a player or a monkey, I could do that. And basically it just has these coordinates that's going to follow, and it's going to lerp to them between the mouse and the player object, and it's going to stay within the room, and then it's going to change the position by the intensity of the camera shake randomly, and it's going to dither off. That's literally all how it works. Next we get into the fun part, the player. The player's scripts are here. And then the player's object code is in here, I think. I feel like I'm missing some stuff. Let's go to OPlayer. Step. Oh. Organize your code, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go through how the player works. In the create event, I create an enumerator for the player states. So there's a normal, dead, and inactive state. Inactive was for if I was going to do a cutscene. So that's unused. You have a maximum of 6 health. The X offset is for GUI purposes. State equals state's not normal. Shoot delay is set at 20 frames. Depth is just so that it's there. Image X scale, which is something I did in code and not in the actual art. Draw set font is just there. The start X and start Y is for the menu. Cursor sprite equals S cursor, which is the thing you saw. And then the audio listener orientation is so that this is the way that GameMaker's audio system works. For some reason, by default, it's upside down. It's an upside down head. So the ears are backwards for some reason. So I had to flip it over essentially. So the look at Y and the up Z are what I had to change to basically flip it over upside down. You can look up the documentation on GameMaker's website. And the step event, this is the switch statement that controls the player state. So if state's at normal, do this function. State's at dead, do this function. This is how you keep the shoot delay going. So if the player's shoot delay is greater than or equal to 0, every frame I subtract from it. So this is so I can control the rate of fire of the player. If rate of fire is less than or equal to 0, it equals 1, so that the player doesn't screw up the shooting code if it gets too many yellow monkeys, or blue monkeys rather. If key speed, so we should go over key speed real quick in the function. So this is how the movement works. This is so that, like, generally in Game Maker you just have a move X and move Y, and you just move them independently of each other. This is so that the player is moving the same speed in all directions. So it is keeping track of just what direction the player is actually going in and applying the same speed for each direction, not multiplying it. So there's a key horizontal, which is calculated by key left, key right, up here. Key vertical, here. Key speed is whether you're moving left or right, up or down. Key direction is point direction of whatever this is. So if I'm moving right, it's 1. If I'm moving down, it's -1. So it would point 1, -1. Simple. And then this is the collision code. So if it's going to make contact with the wall, move it very slightly. If it's going to make contact with the wall, move very slightly, whatever. And then if not, then just move in the direction of the player's speed, or move in the direction of the player is specifying at the specific speed. And this is vertical collision. If the player is dead, go to the dead room, which is just the menu screen for being dead. And then this is for fade to black transitions. And then this is for the JavaScript focus window. Let's go back to the player code. Oh, draw GUI. Oh, this is a player manager. Whoops. Code. Okay. The step event. Let's keep going through here. So that's key speed, and this is just so it can animate, or choose the different sprites to animate with. If not, it'll play the idle sprite. And then this is so that the player can look at the mouse. This is to check if the player is dead. And then this is to check collision with the door. Sorry if you hear my cat. He's upstairs and having a fit. Oh my gosh. Anyway. He's so loud. Anyway. This is to check collision with the door. I didn't give the door its own collision code because it didn't really work out the way this was all coded. So basically, I also took this fade to black transition from the Friendly Cosmonaut on YouTube. So again, I'll link that in the description. She goes into better depth of how it works, but basically, if I'm at a door and I haven't started a transition, it'll start the transition, it'll set my coordinates, it'll get my coordinates ready, and then once the transition's finished, once it's completely faded to black, send me to the next room, and then it'll fade back out, or fade back in rather. And this is to set the position of the audio listener to the player's position. In retrospect, I should have done it to the camera center, but whatever, it sounded fine anyway. Cleanup code, there is none. Draw event, draw self. Draw GUI, there's nothing there. This is for the sandbox mode. So if sandbox is true, and you press M, then create an ally on top of the player, and it will give it a random recruit. Oh, this is for if it collides with ally. This actually shouldn't be in code anymore. There's a lot of garbage code in here, because this is actually what checks for the collision with the ally spawn objects. Oh my god, my cat. I'm not gonna let him down here. He's not allowed in my room. This is, where is it? This is actually garbage code. This shouldn't be in here. but this is a good sneak peek into code for later, so let's just hide that for now. The player shooting. Oh my gosh, the cat. In the create event, there's the gun direction, X scale, and displace. In the step event, if the player's health is above 0, P controls, it'll check the controls of the player. Oh, he's hitting at my door. Okay, I guess I have to let him down here. Give me 1 second. I'm very sorry. Hold on. Okay, come on. Why are you hesitating? You've been asking to get in here. You're gonna leave? Come here, come on. Okay. We now have a guest joining us. My cat is in the room now. Anyway, okay. So it'll constantly be pointing in the direction of the mouse. If the mouse is on one side of the player or not, it'll flip. The gun direction is... I'm not sure what that is. Oh, that's for the X scale of the object. This is so that it can change the displace of the object based on like where I am on like an up and down scale of the player. This is an idea I took from Nuclear Throne, where the gun kind of moves so that it's like in different hands almost. This is the shooting code, so if shoot is true, which means if I'm holding down the mouse, oh my gosh, he's just jumping everywhere, and the shoot delay is less than or equal to 0, so it means I can shoot again after the timer. It'll create an instance of the bullet, which will go at a certain speed, at a certain direction, as with a certain image angle, and it'll play the audio for the throwing sound. It'll also do some screen shake. It will reset the shoot delay, and it'll have like a bit of a balancing effect with these 2 lines of code. And then this is just so I can set the X scale. What is this deal? Anyway, and then the crown object is just so that it follows the player. Oh, he's scratching the walls. These crown pickup objects and the O pickup gun is just for the start room, for like, you know, just so that the player feels like they're doing something at the beginning. And I think that's about it for the player code. Oh yeah, stats. That was all in Player Manager. So let's go back to Room Essentials. Hi, Atticus. The create event. These are all the player stats, basically. The player stats are also in... Oh, no, the health is right here. So it's all... They're all getting accessed by the player object. But he doesn't have any of his variables in him because he's getting reloaded each time. So his create event would be reset each time. So it's important to keep these as a separate object that doesn't reset all of his stats. Next, we are talking about AI programming. Okay. Actually, before I get into that, I want to talk about the allies programming. This is probably the thing I'm most proud of. This entire game is how I coded the allies. So let's talk about it. Let's go into the ally spawn object as well. So they start off as the ally spawn object. These are stationary objects that are there purely for the player to collide with. All this stuff is that it floats up and down on a sine wave, so that it's a little more eye candy. And this is just that it can destroy itself if the player already picked up that monkey spawn. Now with the ally object, here's some of its stuff. So at first it'll be unrecruited, and then it'll have an X random range, and then it'll have a move X and move Y, a type, which is from 0 to 3, so 4 different monkey types, NX and NY, which is just for the Y and X. I'll figure out what these are in a second. Dead equals false, shoot till equals the player's rate of fire. In the step event, this is where it gets fun. So if the player exists, it's going to read the controls, and it will, so it's going to flip to the direction of the mouse. MY and MX is, so, okay, all of this code is essentially doing this. Let's see if we can open up Microsoft Paint, because this is going to be the easiest way to visualize this. So let's say that this rectangle is the player. It didn't fill. Let's say this is the player. The monkeys will choose out of this range. Oh, there goes the rectangle. Let's put it back in. So a specific range that I set, which is from 32 to negative 32. So in this circle of 32, negative 32, 32, negative 32, it will pick a random point to constantly follow. This is so that the player's monkeys will have some variation to how they follow him, so that they wouldn't crowd all over on top of him. And so, like, if I had just set it so that it would follow the player only, they would all be crowded around here. So having this random offset for each one helps with that. And then so that if the player moves a certain distance away, it will, okay, no, well, here's how it works. It'll constantly be moving towards it, basically. And it also has an approximation. So instead of constantly following that single point, that one pixel point, it's going to follow a circle around that point. It's another circle collision. So each point has an approximate circle. And since it's using lerp, it's never going to officially hit this circle because it's smoothing out. So that's what causes monkeys to like float around a point for a while and twitch. So this approximation here is so that when the monkey gets within that circle, it'll stop. So if I'm not in the approximation circle of that point in that big circle, I will move towards it. Otherwise, I'm going to move towards it, but then stop, basically. So it's basically saying like, hi, buddy. So this is updating the point that it has to follow, but if it's there, it's not going to update anymore. It's just going to stay at that point. And having lerp there so that it would just smoothly go there instead of like just teleporting there, basically. So to summarize that, I went through that a little fast, so let's go over it one more time. The player object has a circle radius around him, and each monkey chooses a random point in this circle radius to follow. But because of imprecision with the lerp function and how it follows the points, I also created a circle around that point, which is like an approximation of whether or not that monkey has hit the point that it needs to be at, so that it's constantly trying to stay within this circle around the player. So this would avoid cluttering, this would avoid jitteriness, and it would just overall make the monkeys seem a lot more lifelike. I'm just checking out my cat. So let's look at some of my first attempts with making the monkey following. Let's go through here. So here's what I did, and here's some old art as well. So originally I had it so that if the monkeys weren't within a certain radius of the player, they would follow the player. But as you can see, this caused some crowding, and it didn't really look great. So my next attempt went something like this, where I was getting to the idea of having a circle that they follow. Now, they would still stop if they were in a certain radius of the player and if the player was moving. So this looked a lot more natural, but again, they were crowding, and they also had some weird spread to them. And then finally, or I believe this is the last one. Let's see. See, now the monkeys have their final movement code, basically, and they will follow the player and stop when they get within a certain point of their approximation. So that the following is varied and natural. And my cat just knocked something over. And that it looks good. Let me see if I updated anything else in here. This was just more updates to the movement code and some improvements to the monkey following. That little bounce you see them do is just a symptom of using the lerp function. But I feel like it added a lot to the character of the monkeys. Now, this is only for the black monkeys. So if they're a certain type and the shoot delay is below 0, it will shoot. Simple enough. This is for when the monkey dies. The way the monkey manager works is that all these global variables keep track of the different types of monkeys it has. So it'll spawn in every type of monkey you have on you. So if this monkey dies, this switch statement subtracts whatever it is. So if it's a type 0 monkey, it'll reduce whatever bonus it gave, reduce its type, and then reduce the monkey count, and then destroy the object. And then finally in the draw, it's just going to draw its type, and then draw self. Okay. Also, the way that this works is that the frame of the image is type and then +1, because the first frame of this sprite is, I believe it's sprite 8. Yeah, so each frame has the different look. And this is the initial one. So it only gets the hat when you collide with it. All right, let's take a quick cut. Okay, we're back. Next, we're going to talk about the enemies. So we already went over that the enemy object is the parent for all the enemies. The only things that they refer back to it for are the draw event, the begin step, and the bullet collision. Oops. Okay. So let's start with the simplest one, which is the turret. So let's go through all its steps. Oops. Okay. Whoops. That's inherited from the enemy object. Let's go back to the turret. There's no draw GUI. Okay. So let's look at its create event. It has its enemy. So this is the format for each enemy. Enemy HP. Sometimes I'll have a shoot delay or an equivalent if it's a charge character. So like the boss, which charges at you, or the bug or the ant that charges at you. In range equals false. So they'll have their own parameters for their attacks, and then they'll have their HP. In the step event, if HP is less than or equal to 0, it's dead. And it'll add itself to the dead list and do all the dead stuff. Oops. Sorry about my microphone. If it is within a certain radius of the player, yo, chill. If it's within a certain radius of the player, in range equals true. If shoot delay is greater than or equal to 0, it will shoot, or less than or equal to 0, sorry. It will shoot a bullet at them, and then reset the shoot delay. Else is false. Shoot delay minus, point at the player. Now the reason I have in range is that it could draw a red line to the player so the player knows it's aiming at them when they're in range. And then the start of the room, dead list. Simple enough. Let's go on to the bug enemy, because this is actually the first enemy I programmed. And let's go through all his code. So for the rest of the enemies, they have functions in here. LA is for the B, because it was supposed to be an elephant, but now it's a bee, so I just didn't feel like changing it. And bug is for the ant. And the boss, I believe all his code is in here. Yes. Okay. So let's go to the bug. So the bug has HP of 75. So this is actually important for aggroing. So it has a max HP. J is just another like variable used for charging, which you'll see in a second. Timer is another variable for charging. Bug states: idle, wander, aggro, dead. It begins in the idle state. Other variables. In the step event, this is I can call the functions for different states. Dead list, timer, timer addition, shoot delay. Draw event, debugging for seeing the range of the bug, seeing its its different stats and all that. And then this is so that it can just point towards the direction of the player without messing up its collision box, which is very important. His collision, or the bug's collision, is always going to be a rectangle, but the sprite itself is going to be drawn so it's pointing towards the player. And then at the room start, dead list. Let's go into enemy, and let's look at some of his code. So the idle code for the bug. So every few seconds, so every second rather, because room speed is 60 frames per second. Every second, it's going to have a random coin toss, essentially, for whether it goes into a wander state or if it stays in the idle state. Also in the idle state, if it is within a certain collision circle of the player, it'll immediately go to aggro, or if the player shoots at it and lowers its health, it immediately goes to aggro. When it goes into the wander state, it's basically all that, except it also moves in a random direction. For the bug aggro state, it will follow the player, and so this collision thing is just checking for collision. If the player is within a certain circle of the ant, so specifically a 240 pixel radius circle, it will do the attack. Otherwise, it'll follow the player. The function for the bug attack is, what is it? Yeah, here it is. So it's just shoot at him. And then here's your shoot delay. And then subtract your shoot delay in your step event. I'm not sure why he had timer and J, but I'm pretty sure it's reserved for this guy. Charge time. I'm not sure we had J in here. More garbage code. Refactor your code. So let's look at the B code. Create event. Here's the B's health. B's states. Starting state. Move X, move Y. The direction. The counter. Charge delay. Charge time. Store X and Y. And hit false. Dead list. States. The direction of the sprite. Now let's go into the LE code. In the idle state, the B is going to do the same going to do the same coin toss and the same checks as the ant. I could have chill out. I could have reused this function, except for the fact that it has a specific state, specific enumerator that it needs to do. I could have set the states to numbers and then set these equal to numbers, and that would have been decoupled code. That is something that you should think about doing if you're going to make a lot more enemies, that you don't have to reuse all this code. So in retrospect, I should have decoupled this and made it a more universal system for state changes rather than having each one having its own enumerator for states. In the wander one, it'll have collision. However, in the aggro state, it never goes back to wandering or idling. So it loses all collision so that it can fly through objects to hit the player. So when he's aggroing, he'll move towards his move X and move Y. If he's within a certain radius of the player, he initiates attack. And all this gets set. Otherwise, he's moving towards the player to get in range of the player. Now, he's talking. Hi, Atticus. Anyway. Meow. Anyway, so he's what I would consider a charge character. He waits a certain amount of time and then charges at you. So charge delay is equivalent to shoot delay, but it's much longer. So if charge time is greater than or equal to 0, when you're in range, he's gonna... Okay, so move X, he's gonna move towards you, right? He's going to... This is his charge. And charge time is how long he's charging at you. Originally, I had it so that... Here, let's make another visual. Originally, I had it so that when the B gets to a certain point, it stops. That wasn't very dynamic, and it felt really robotic, so that if the player was staying next to the B, he would only charge a tiny bit, and the player would be gone by then. So I made it so that he just follows through, which required him to lose collision so that he could actually hit these points. If he hits the player, hit equals true. He does the hit stuff, and he can't hit him again. So if he somehow rams into the player for consecutive frames, he's not going to lose health every frame. And then if charge time is less than 0, reset the charge time, reset the charge delay, and go back to the aggro state. Okay, and so that's all the enemies. And now we're going to talk about the boss. Oh, here's the boss's code. Boss is 5,000 HP. All the boss's states. So Wander, deciding is deciding which attack to do next. But Wander is just how you can move around. Shooting, charging, summoning, dead. He starts in the deciding stage. And then here's all his other stuff. He's basically a mishmash of every enemy. He has a turret, he moves, he charges, and he can summon these enemies. Okay. Dead check. Switch between functions. You know the drill. If he's dead, do the dead. Change his orientation. Change the shoot delay. This is all the boss's function. So deciding, this is basically the equivalent to the idle stage, but he's always aggroed. So he's going to do a coin toss between 4 different states. Whether he wanders so he can move around, whether he summons more enemies, whether he starts shooting at the player, or whether he charges at the player. If he decides to wander, he's going to move around for 3 seconds in a random direction. So he's going to move towards this way for 3 seconds, this way 3 seconds, and he goes back to deciding. If he's charging at the player, he's doing the exact same thing that Aleph is. The spider has no collision at all. However, it would have been a better idea to give him collision, considering there's no obstacles in his room except for the walls, and so that he could stay within range the entire time. That's something I should have done in retrospect, but I didn't really see when I was working on it. That's just a symptom of game dev. Not game dev, game jams. So it's the exact same code as the Aleph, or the B rather, but instead he goes back to the deciding state. The shooting state is the exact same as the turret, and then after a certain amount of time, for 7 seconds rather, he goes back to deciding. Summoning was cool because this was unique to him. So every second, he spawns a new enemy, so it's a random enemy. Or no, it's the same enemies. He spawns a turret, he spawns a bug, and he spawns a bee. And then he goes back to deciding. When he's dead, this is just so that I can make the explosions for when he dies. So it'll spawn a new explosion at a random point after a certain amount of frames. So frame 1, half a second, full second, second and a half, 2 seconds, you know. And then after all that, you go to the win room. And you beat the game, woohoo! And that is all of the AI for It Together Strong. All right, next we're going to be talking about level design and art. Okay, so I just wanted to take a minute and gawk at all the beautiful art that Jaylene made for this game. So let's look for these sprites. And also talk about briefly, but you saw in code how I animated these. You just change the image index, and sometimes you have special cases like with these monkeys where you want to change the frame and not the actual index. And the way that I have it at these like still frames without animating is just you set the FPS to 0. I just want to take a moment to look at all the great art. So here's his walk cycle. Here's his crown. Here's the cursor I made, which I'm really proud of. Here's the empty health. And then here is the gun. Here's the full health. Here's a ladder I made. Here's his idle animation. And he like bounces up and down. Here is the sprite sheet I took from the internet, which I will find for you by the time I upload this. Here's an icon I made. It's not very good. Here's the windscreen. I made this in paint.net because I didn't know how to type this out with code without messing it all up. Here's the bullet object. Here's the flower. Here's the key. Here's a death screen I made. Here's the spider. He's not animated. Here's a enemy bullet I made. Here are the different monkeys. I gave them hats, which I'm actually kind of proud of. The ant I also made. And then the bee Jaylene made. They're all really great, and the game wouldn't be half the game it is without them. There's also some other sprite sheets I took from here. Here's this. Here's what I use for shadows. And then, here's what I use for the ground. I built all of the levels using the tile editor in GameMaker, so I don't know if we can see any of the there's no brushes for this actually. So I have some custom tiles set out for different details, like these little patches of dirt and other stuff like that. Shadows are the top layer, and since it's a tile set, it doesn't follow the rules of the draw function. I didn't use auto tiling because I didn't really like it, and I couldn't really figure out how to get it to work. Here's the borders of the room. They're also what's used for the shadows, and the shadows are just that with lowered transparency, and I thought it was a pretty good effect. And then these ground tiles are arranged like this, so there's random details in here. I can pick and choose details from here. Here's the patches, and the patches are just the background color of the room. And then here's the transitions. And then here are bigger patches. And then these details are also part of the border art. And then these smaller details are part of deco. Oh, there goes the cat. And then these smaller details are part of deco. So they're right here. All the collision is done with an object in coal layer, and they're just walls that I built. So here's the start room, and as you can see, and these are invisible to the player in game. These are only visible to me in here. This door object has its own code. It's the room that's going to be transitioned to. So this is what they set next room as. And then these are the coordinates that the player is getting sent to. I wanted each room to feel almost like an arena. So no mazes or anything like that. I just wanted there to be a clear layout of enemies and a clear play space and something for like the player to dodge and weave around. This hub area I could have done a little more work on detail wise and pointing out the different paths, I guess I was a little pressed for time. And as for including enemies into each room, let's see, test 5, test 4, open up, there we go. As for including enemies in each room, I just went gradual from difficulty. But I just wanted it to focus more on arena combat almost. So big walls, obvious obstacles, no secrets, no hidden enemies or anything like that. Just something for the player to get used to quickly and understand the layout of. These are just smaller rooms with a lot of shadows, and these also follow the dead list, and they just add to the key count whenever they're collided with. Making levels was definitely the most fun part about this project, other than coding the AI. Because this is where all the magic happens. This is where all of it comes together, and all the stuff you worked on starts to, that's not a level, starts to get put into use. And this is definitely the most important part as well, because this is what the player is going to be going through. And I wouldn't say that I did amazing level design or anything. In fact, I feel like I could have done a little better with some of the rooms, as well as variety for maybe like obstacles or objects or enemies. But overall, I feel like the way I design levels complement the gameplay. There's a lot of dodging and weaving, and especially with these ant characters that chase you down, getting them around walls and stuff was a lot of fun, and having some cover. And these bee enemies were always weeping around you all the time. I feel like the best room in the game is, let me find it. Oh, it's the left one room here. Because there's a lot of hard enemies. I feel like I should include some flowers in here, and maybe another bee, because this is definitely the hardest room, quote unquote, for people who have, it's their first time playing. A lot of these guys who shoot and chase you down, and a lot of stuff to weave around, and some pretty big objects. So you can see a guy on the other side, and he's trying to shoot at you. You know, another guy's coming down here, and this bee's trying to shoot. What I really wanted the player to feel like was that they were dodging, weaving, and saving their monkeys. I wasn't afraid of pelting the player with a bunch of bullets. These guys shoot really fast, and I only felt comfortable with that because of how much health the player had, as well as the human shield that the monkeys were. And it's both a way to incentivize the player to get more monkeys, as well as to put a lot more care into, like, put a lot more importance to the player caring about the monkeys they're recruiting. The more monkeys you lose, the less cover you have, and also the worse your stats are. The reason these enemies have so much health and why your initial attack is so low is that you want these monkeys to come help you out. It's that you feel like you're overcoming all these enemies. I feel like I could have communicated that feeling a bit better with some more levels and some better level design. But overall, I feel like I was able to do it with a few rooms, like this one. I'm overall happy with how I designed the levels. They're not the best. I gotta close that out. They're not the best, but they are memorable. At least for anyone who wants to keep playing it. They're easy to remember the layout, and they just make sense. I really wish I could have made a lot more levels for this game, because I just had so much fun making these levels and painting them out with the tile editor. This was probably the best part of the project. This boss room was just thrown together at the last second. I wanted to make sure that the player wasn't going to die on the boss, so I gave him plenty of health. And I gave him a big room to fight the boss in, because there was going to be more enemies. And this is a pretty big boss, and he chases you down a lot. And that's it for level design. As for other goodies, sandbox, test rooms, screens, I feel like I went over those already throughout this, so efficient, I guess. Here's the death screen. Press R to reset. You start at the start room. This is the win screen. It'll print out the amount of monkeys you had here. This got messed up in the HTML version because I did something wrong with the level loading, but it's okay. Yeah, it's right here actually. This should have been, or no, somewhere here. Yeah, I should have enabled viewport. I should have had this, and then this should have been this should have been the room size, and then this should have been 1920 1080, and that would have fixed it on the HTML version. But if you were playing the Windows version, it fits the screen perfectly fine. If you play this game, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And then the sandbox mode was just super easy to implement. It's if the player had gone through it and they press M, then they can spawn more monkeys. I've seen some people on the submissions page, or my page where they can post comments, or even a DM that I got after I posted my game, where people love the sandbox mode. They were spawning tons of monkeys and seeing how far they could get. But an issue they ran into was not being able to get back into this final room. Was because the way I coded this locked door, which we can go into right here, if the player had 2 keys, that is the worst thing I could have done for this. It should have been 2 or greater than or equal to 2 keys so they can keep going through it. Because then they got locked out of the room because they had more than 2 keys. So it's like, oh, you can't go inside the boss room. So that was a huge mistake on my part. And I feel like that kind of soiled the ending of the game a little bit, was not being able to use as many of these monkeys as you got. And also not scaling difficulty, but that would have taken a lot more time. Yeah, he's not happy about it either. Hey, chill out. Come here. We're almost done, Atticus. So, that is basically a complete breakdown of Apes Together Strong, or Ape Together Strong, rather. And now is time for the reflection, I guess. What I could have done better, what I learned, and what my feelings are towards Game Maker Studio after this project. I definitely feel like I could have had better infrastructure overall. The way I set up my managers and my game objects or whatever wasn't really the best organized and the most optimized. But I guess it worked out in the end because I was able to stitch together a full game and easily add on more to it as time went on. I feel like my biggest issue with this was both debugging, as in like just getting rid of all the bugs and kinks and polishing it, as well as decoupling code. If I did want to add on to this, I would have to do a big refactor, not just so I can get neater code, but also so I could decouple a lot of the code that was used, such as like for charge enemies and for shooting enemies, and just in general for the player and for the different monkey types. I shouldn't have had to rewrite functions for each enemy, and I feel like that slowed down development a lot too, was not having these universal functions. So that's something I definitely should have done as well. But overall, I learned a lot. I learned about how to use Game Maker a lot more. I learned a lot about level design. I learned a lot about game infrastructure, most of all, because this is a complete game in my eyes. And it definitely took a lot of organizing and understanding the different systems that made it all work. I also learned a lot about time management. This was made in under a week, and oh my god, it was excruciating. And it took a lot of time to get this together. So I gained a new appreciation for solo devs everywhere who have made complete games on their own. And I can say for sure that it is a lot harder than it seems. I also learned a lot of good debugging techniques. I never really made use of the draw functions or anything like that, or having some kind of developer only look into the game. But having here, I'll even show you the debugging functions I had. So let's pop in here. Let's just run quickly through the opening sequence. Make it a little easier for myself by grabbing some of these guys. I think I'll be fine. Let me just get rid of this guy real quick. Atticus, chill out. Okay, and then this next room I'll show you the debugging. Oh, you know what? No, I got rid of it in the end. That's right. But basically, what would have happened is that they would draw the different collision circles that are needed for each enemy, and the stats, and where it's aiming towards. And I also used console debugging so that it would print out what was going on in the console, and also using GameMaker's debugger. Oh my gosh, Atticus, chill out. Also using GameMaker's debugger to look for any memory leaks and just overall optimize it even better. So I'm so sorry, I'm talking over my cat. But I learned a lot of good techniques just for better practice. Chill out. This cat. What I wish I would have done was set up some kind of source control. I was keeping this anecdote for the very end because I don't feel like it's going to affect anyone ever in the existence of game maker developers, but this affected me. Something happened where one of my room's code or whatever corrupted. I couldn't edit the creation code. I couldn't edit the room's contents. I couldn't do anything with it. And whenever I tried to run the game, it wouldn't compile, and it wasn't telling me what was going on. Nothing was working, and at some point, assets started deloading or unloading rather. And oh my goodness, I want to continue. I want to finish this story. Assets were unloading in GameMaker, like the IDE. Stuff wasn't showing up. My whole game file had been corrupted, and I didn't know what to do. It took me 4 or 5 hours to figure it out. That I just had to delete the room that wasn't working. I just deleted it in the IDE, and everything went back to normal. It compiled, everything worked. And that just goes to show that some crazy stuff can happen sometimes out of nowhere, and something that you really need, something that I need to really get in good practice of, is backing everything up using GitHub or any kind of source control that I can. I didn't set that up for this project because it was a week-long thing, and I also don't know how to use GitHub. I do, but I don't really know how to use it well. So if you're ever working on any kind of project, whether it's a test project or a game jam or a large-scale game, you need to have some kind of source control. And that is a summary of all the stuff I learned from working on this game. Okay, this has gone on for long enough, so I'm gonna close it out here while my cat is still. Oh my goodness. So, so that was a full breakdown of all the code for my Game Jam game, Ape Together Strong. We went over the concept, design, and theme of the game. We went over systems and management. We went over level loading, data structures. We went over player programming, stats, and camera. We went over AI programming and enemy design. We went over level design. We went over some extra stuff you can do as a developer. And we went over some better practice stuff that could have been done here. I feel like this is very beneficial for any beginner of Game Maker Studio to look at if they are looking to get started on their first full project, or maybe even a game jam, or just generally looking for better practice for Game Maker Studio. I can't personally say that I'm going to keep using Game Maker Studio because I don't really like the limitations that it puts on me as a developer, where I have to rely on Game Maker's rules for everything. It's very convenient and it's very intuitive in the editor and in GML code, but overall I felt like I had no control over any of my actual code and anything that was going on in the game, and I would rather have more control over that. And that's where something like using a framework or any other engine, I guess, but like just anything else would come in handy as opposed to Game Maker. So I hope that was helpful for all of you, any of you watching rather, and I hope that this can inspire you to make some games of your own. It'll instill some better not business practices. What am I saying? Some better developer practices in you, and just in general, um, just serve as a good refresher for uh, making games. Making games is a lot of fun, and it's also very challenging, but it's very rewarding. And having your own finished product in the end is definitely worth it. Um, in the game jam I entered in, I placed 150 something out of 1,800 participants, and I got 32nd for theme. Not bad. It was my first game jam, so I should be proud of that. And if any of you are considering entering a game jam or considering getting into game dev at all, uh, don't be afraid of it. It's a lot of fun. It definitely takes a lot of practice and a lot of commitment, but it is one of the it's one of the most rewarding things you could do as a programmer or a lover of video games. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.